Welcome back. Let us start session 4. First, Ms. Mary Shapiro, head the TCFD Secretariat, will give a keynote speech.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the event organizers and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry for inviting me to be part of this important event. I am delighted to be speaking with you today about the financial sector's critical role alongside governments and companies in the net zero transition. Specifically, how this transition is being catalyzed by the uptake of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. To begin, I would like to congratulate Japan for their strong leadership in their adoption of TCFD and centering financial resilience through climate risk mitigation and disclosure. 30% of TCFD supporters are from Japan, accounting for over 1,000 companies, which is really remarkable. Thank you for your partnership in making TCFD a success. I am inspired by the work that is being done in the region to engage the capital markets in the fight against climate change. As you know, the TCFD helped drive convergence around a common set of recommended disclosures, which in turn has driven greater disclosure by companies and interest in those disclosures from investors. This embrace by the private sector has helped regulators, including the Financial Services Authority, understand the importance of these disclosures and their centrality to the investment decision-making process. And now, with the launch of the International Sustainability Standards Board's S1 and S2 standards, we have a common global set of climate disclosure standards. We've also seen an increase in countries' climate ambitions, building on the foundations of the Paris Agreement. Countries representing over 90% of global GDP have now made net zero commitments and are increasingly putting in place policies to back those commitments. With clearer direction in policy, the shape of the transition is becoming clearer, which translates into meaningful risk to those companies that do not account for it in their core business strategies. This means that in addition to providing TCFD-aligned risk disclosure, every company needs to have and disclose a plan for how they are going to address the risks and seize the opportunities of the net zero transition. In response to these developments, we now have more than 650 financial institutions across more than 50 countries committed to net zero through the 8 alliances that make up the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ. The coalition continues to grow, with more financial institutions recognizing the business imperative of aligning with the transition, including in Africa and here in Asia, where we launched regional networks last year, including the first country chapter here in Japan. We will launch a Latin American network this fall. GFANZ brings together the entire value chain of the net zero committed financial sector to address shared challenges, most notably developing the common tools and frameworks needed to deliver on net zero commitments through transition planning. One of our priorities this year, building off TCFD, is working with financial institutions to develop their transition plans using the framework GFANZ developed last year. This framework identifies the common elements of a credible, comprehensive transition plan. It has broad application for all financial institutions and corporates, regardless of climate commitments. GFANZ is focused on supporting decarbonization in the real economy, as the world cannot divest its way to net zero. As such, our transition plan framework identifies 4 key strategies of transition finance. The first is to support climate solutions, the technologies and products that will enable the economy to decarbonize. The second is to finance business models already aligned with a science-based pathway to net zero. The third strategy is going where the emissions are and financing those companies with credible transition plans to converge with a science-based decarbonization pathway. And finally, climate transition means backing the managed phase-out of those high-emitting assets at risk of being stranded in a net zero economy. To this end, our Asia-Pacific network released draft guidance on the managed phase-out of coal-fired power plants for consultation this summer, and we will be releasing a final version in time for COP28. The GFANZ Transition Plan framework is not a one-size-fits-all rule. Every institution will need to define its own path based on its business model, client base, and regulatory exposures. But converging around a practitioner-developed common framework for transition plans is essential to reducing market fragmentation and reporting burdens, as well as driving adoption by policymakers. That was my experience leading the TCFD. As I noted, we have now seen the TCFD disclosure framework become the law in multiple jurisdictions and form the basis for the ISSB climate disclosure standards. We're starting to see movement towards transition plans entering regulatory requirements, and it's important that we work to encourage a globally consistent approach building on the TCFD and ISSB. Achieving net zero by 2050 is an ambitious objective. Now we need to back that ambition with transparent data, consistent disclosure, including transition planning, and credible action in support of emissions reductions. Thank you to everyone present for your invaluable contributions to furthering this global objective. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite to the podium Mr. Ito Kunio, Chair, the TCFD Consortium, to give a keynote speech.
As the chair of the TCFD Consortium, which is a co-host, I'd like to express my gratitude for being able to convene the 5th TCFD Summit 2023 today. Since the last TCFD Summit 2022, circumstances surrounding issues related to climate change disclosure has changed significantly due to net zero pledges by countries and companies. As you know, and today's panels refer to that, in June, the IFRS Foundation, which formulates international accounting standards, published the Sustainability Disclosure Standards. The standards require disclosure in accordance with the 4 themes of TCFD recommendations: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. It will come into effect from January 2024. And development of climate-related disclosure will be transferred from TCFD to ISSB. Therefore, it can be said that the TCFD and the TCFD Consortium have reached a major turning point. Needless to say, this does not mean that climate-related disclosure will cease to exist. To the contrary, the importance of climate-related disclosure will further increase towards the realization of our green transformation, that is a GX, announced by the government of Japan. Against this backdrop, the momentum for climate-related disclosure in Japan has further gained steam, and the number of organizations supporting the TCFD has exceeded 4,700 worldwide. Of these, the number of Japanese organizations supporting the TCFD is 1,454, more than double the number of the second highest country, which is about 500, making Japan the country with the highest number of TCFD supporters by far. In Japan, the Corporate Governance Code was revised in June 2021 to require disclosure in accordance with the TCFD for participants of the prime market of Tokyo Stock Exchange. This has triggered a wave of support for TCFD. Not only does Japan have a large number of supporting organizations, but the quality of disclosure has been steadily improving. About 70% of the members of the TCFD consortium are non-financial companies. And there is a growing trend in which companies voluntarily take proactive measures against climate change and disclose information. As two of the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standard stipulates climate-related disclosure. Although it is based on the 4 themes of TCFD recommendation I mentioned earlier. More details is required for the strategy section, and disclosure of Scope 3 emissions are required in the same degree as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. These features suggest that the movement to strengthen disclosure will accelerate. The TCFD consortium has held a series of discussions where companies and the investors involved in disclosures based on the TCFD recommendations and their utilization come together and has formulated and revised the TCFD guidance and the green investment guidances. Presently, formulation of a transition plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 is being recommended, and various organizations about the world have formulated the guidance and standards to enhance integrity of transition plans. The consortium recognizes the importance of transition plans, of course, and is actively conducting discussions on what kind of disclosure is desirable in Japan. At the G7 Hiroshima Summit held in May of this year, other countries reaffirmed the importance of transition plans, along with the importance of transition finance. Therefore, emphasis on transition plans has been increasing for the realization of Japan's GX. It can be said from the above that the TCFD consortium provides a rare forum where entities which undertake climate-related disclosure and those which utilize disclosures can discuss a wide range of topics. We are discussing how supporters in Japan should address rapidly evolving global trends. Going forward, in addition to the 3 initial objectives of the TCFD consortium, 1 is initiative for members, 2 is initiative for non-members, and 3, implementation, international collaboration and communications. We will also focus on the development of human capital for sustainability. This will not only support the disclosure of TCFD itself, but also the development of human capital for sustainability at the management level. From the next fiscal year, we are also considering the implementation of a human capital development program hosted by Hitotsubashi University's CFO Education and Research Center, Hitotsubashi 大学教育研究 Center, and co-hosted by the TCFD Consortium. This year's summit will discuss further needed to further promote transition finance. In order to realize the GX, it is expected that public and the private sectors are required to invest a total of 150 trillion yen, or about $1 trillion US. In order to decarbonize the real economy, transition finance for higher emission industries is indispensable. It is my wish that the government, industry, and financial leaders actively engages in discussing these issues. I also hope that through today's discussion, companies will enhance their TCFD disclosures. Financial institutions will appropriately evaluate them, resulting in provision of finance needed to address the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ito. Now we would like to move on to panel discussion 4, entitled Further Promotion of Transition Finance. The facilitator of this session is Mr. Kihara Shinichi, Director General for International Policy on Carbon Neutrality, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Mr. Kihara, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start the panel discussion 4 on further promotion of transition finance. I am Shinichi Kihara, Director General for International Carbon Neutral Policy in METI, Japan. I'm very happy to moderate this exciting panel with wonderful panelists today. Very quick introduction. We have 4 panelists, starting from Nicholas Puff, Mr. Nicholas Puff on the screen, Deputy CEO and Head of Sustainable Finance, International Capital Market Association, ICMA. Then,
good afternoon.
To the right, Mr. Sean Kidney, CEO, Climate Bond Initiative. And Ayla Gravy, Director and Chief Sustainable Finance Advisor, European Investment Bank. And Nobuhiko Kubota, Managing Executive Officer, General Manager of Technology and Intelligence Integration, IHI Corporation. Thank you for all coming today. So the main theme of this panel is further promotion of transition finance. We highlighted the disclosure angle in the previous session, but today we have policy and industry and finance people on the stage. So we're gonna discuss about the interaction of these players. Let me start from some background information. Starting from, in case of Japan, we have committed to reach carbon neutral by 2050. And we also have announced greenhouse gas 46% reduction by 2030 compared to 2013. Many other countries have similar goals in different variations. But often, people get excited discussing increasing renewable energy capacity, phasing out coal-fired plant, and other measures to decarbonize power sector. However, power sector only accounts for only 30% of global CO2 emission. We need to challenge how we can decarbonize also the industry sector and also the transportation sector. We need to think about the whole of economy, realize decarbonization to reach net zero. However, these sectors include hard-to-abate industries like steel, chemical, and cement. So for these hard-to-abate sectors and even some power sector, we cannot bring down to zero emission overnight because the clean technology requires further innovation or still expensive or geologically not accessible. Also, these carbon-intensive sectors still faces divestment from finance sector because financing such sector will spoil the portfolio of the investor or banks. So the concept of transition becomes very important. To realize whole of economy decarbonization, we need to push and support all sectors to make progress in their decarbonization. So from finance angle, we need a mechanism that assist, not divest from, industry that are making serious efforts towards credible transition. Recently, various initiatives have set out guidelines on climate transition finance. The first penguin was the Climate Transition Finance Handbook issued by ICMA back in 2020. The Japanese government also followed issuing our guidance in 2021, and since then, TCFD, G-Funds, Net Zero Banking Alliance, CBI, OECD, UK, and so on have published the documents related to transition. This year in the G7, under Japanese presidency, the role of transition finance was highlighted in the Climate Energy Ministers track and also the Finance Ministers track. And in the Leaders Communique, G7 leaders recognized for the first time the importance of the transition finance. And this June, ICMA released the revised handbook with major updates. Just quickly introducing the Japanese version of transition finance mechanism, METI provides 4-step policy tools to enhance credibility of companies' transition plan. First, can you pull up the slide? Yes. First, we published the basic guidelines for transition finance, which is in line with the ICMA handbook. And second, we have announced the technology roadmaps for 8 sectors, including hard-to-abate industries. They are iron, steel, chemical, electricity, gas, oil, cement, paper pulp, and automobiles. And these cover 80% of CO2 emission of Japan. Third, METI provides support for model projects. And fourth and last, METI released supplemental tools such as follow-up guidance and also paper on financed emission. Using these support tools, a cumulative volume of transition loans and bonds issued by a variety of Japanese industry is over 1 trillion yen or $7 billion today. Furthermore, now, Japanese government itself is no longer the promoter, but the user of transition finance. Japanese government plans to issue Japanese climate transition bond amounting 20 trillion yen or $140 billion in the 10 years as a new type of Japanese government bond, which will be labeled as a transition bond. So this is a scene setting, and let's move on to the discussion. We would like to hear general views on transition finance from ICMA, CBI, and EIB. So first, I'd like to ask each panelist about what the current status is on transition towards carbon neutrality that yourselves are working on generally. And second, what do you think are the challenges for the wider use of climate transition finance? Nicolas-san, can you go first as the first penguin? Followed by Sean-san and then Elia-san. Can you talk about these points, including your self-introduction? So, Nicolas-san, please go ahead.
Yes, Kara-san, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'm assuming you can all hear me.
Yes, I will
hear you. Very good. Very good. So you have stolen my thunder a little bit, but I'll start with my self-introduction. So I'm the Deputy CEO of ICMA. We are the association that represents broadly the bond markets. My responsibility is particularly towards sustainable finance, and as many of you in the room may know, we provide a voluntary guidance for sustainable bonds, from green bonds through to sustainability linked, or for that matter, transition bonds, and these are followed by 95% of issuers globally. So we have a real global consensus around how we do sustainable bonds. Now, we have, as Kira-san has kindly said, guidance specifically for transition. We published in 2020 I think, very innovative piece of work called the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. And this document really, I think, was one of the first to point to the importance of strategy and transition plans at the organization level to underpin efforts for transition and also to indicate how they could be financed. Now, we have updated this document for the first time since 2020, this year in 2023. You have, I think, on the screen now a overview of the work we've done, and I'll take you through that quickly. So, in the new edition, we have first generally updated it for clarity and user-friendliness. There are dedicated recommendations for climate-themed green sustainability and sustainability-linked bonds. And we've added new annexes with illustrative disclosures, infographics, what you have one of them on the screen, and a list of wider market and official sector guidance for climate-themed bonds. The infographic aims to present, to condense everything that we're trying, or the key points we're trying to convey around transition finance. And I'll stop on that for just a little bit. In the infographic in the middle, you have 4 boxes, and they are the key elements that we're recommending for climate transition finance for at the organization level. And the first is, as I said, you really need to have a climate transition strategy with appropriate governance. This strategy has to pertain to your business model in a material manner. It's not just part of your business, it's a holistic approach. Your strategy has to be science-based. That may seem obvious, but it's important to underline it each time. And finally, you need to have implementation transparency. And this is, you essentially have to focus on the OPEX and the CAPEX to some manner by providing information on how you are going to deliver your strategy through your investment program and other expenditures. Now, at the bottom, you have the 2 large categories of how you can finance this strategy in the sustainable bond market. On the one hand, you can have green and sustainability bonds, so use of proceeds bonds that focus on projects. These can be also referred to as transition bonds when they are being applied specifically to projects in that space. And then you can have sustainability-linked bonds, which focus on KPIs and targets at the organization level without worrying about the detail of the expenditure. And this is a product which has been particularly successful in Europe and has reached historically about 200 billion plus in stock. Now, coming back to what has changed this year compared to 2020, we've integrated also in our guidance just transition considerations, and we have further emphasized a recommendation towards independent oversight of transition plans. We make specific reference to Scope 3, where material and also emphasize the disclosure of a reporting timeline. We provide more detail on science-based trajectories and the emissions reduction transition path, including the target of well below 2-degree scenario. And we also provide at a technical level new details about carbon cost assumptions, phase-out plans for carbon-intensive activities, and disclosures of any locked-in emissions. I could say more, but I'll stop there as a quick update on the work that we've done. And we're very, very pleased that the Japanese government has integrated in its guidance what we have been doing. You know, this is a real indication of support for our work, and we're very grateful.
Thank you, Nicolas. Definitely. Thank you for the introduction of the detail about your revised handbook. And yes, and Japanese transition finance mechanism, yes, follows your handbook very closely. Next, I move on to Sean. Can I invite your views on the transition finance?
Well, look, we've got a huge job to do. Huge job. If you read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, you've heard about it from previous speakers today. We have to get global emissions down by 60% by 2035. This is extraordinary. We have never done anything like this on the history of the planet before, across all our economies, all our societies, and so on. We need to transition. That's the first thing to say. This is an extraordinary industrial, economic, built environment change if we have any kind of future for our children. We've had some wins. In 2021, the Japanese Prime Minister, along with the leader of Europe and the leader of the US, agreed on substantial emissions reduction targets for 2050, but most importantly for 2030. That is, it's got to be front-loaded, this change. They recognise that, and now we're acting on it. That's a win. Unfortunately, it's tough. It's very tough to shift industries that are polluting that we need. We can't make the transition without steel. We can't make the transition without chemicals. We need these kinds of industries, which present such a large slice of the economy anyway. According to a report by McKinsey at the beginning of this year, to make the transition, I'm going to keep calling it transition because this is what we've got to get into our head. It's not just going green, it's shifting our economies. It's going to be about 1,400 trillion yen per annum. Just imagine that figure, 1,400 trillion yen per annum. This is an unbelievable capital lump. Luckily, about 2/3 can be done with changing procurement guidelines. That is, stop building freeways, build more Shinkansen. That should be easy for us around the world. We do need, however, to invest in what will be a capex lump. There's a bunch of things that we need to build now. Let's think of a solar farm. Low OPEX, high capex, much higher capex than, say, a coal-fired power station, and we have to deal with that problem. Luckily, we have the capital. We have more than enough capital on the planet. Don't let anyone ever say to you there's a shortage of capital. On the contrary, it's only a question of a shortage of capital in some areas. The challenge, and this is why the finance sector is so important, it's about how to redirect that capital, not how to create it. We've actually done very well on capital creation over the last 50 years in the world. We've got a proof that we've had some success. In the green bonds market, we now have 450 trillion yen outstanding, thanks to Isla, who launched the very first climate awareness bond in 2008 and started a revolution, which has grown. And that includes the transition bonds in Japan that we count as part of the broader climate universe. There are many flavours of ice cream now when it comes to bonds. There are green bonds, resilience bonds, blue bonds, there are transition bonds. They are all to do with climate. They just focus on a different slice of the problem. We expect to see the transition bond market to grow to become $1.5 trillion in the next couple of years. $1.5 trillion US dollars, that is, not yen. So much larger. At Climate Bonds, we work on policy, we work on guidance, and we work on certification of these kinds of bonds. Industrials, transition plans, we certify companies now. And I want to mention something that we haven't talked about today, which is the property sector. 40% of emissions reductions we have to achieve between now and 2050 are in the built environment. We need our buildings to become net zero everywhere. That means this building has to be retrofitted and fixed up to reduce its energy use, and every building everywhere. Tokyo is not too bad, but hey, it's got a hell of a lot to do by 2050, which applies to every single city in the world. I say that because that will be an opportunity for a lot of transition bonds. We'll see a lot of volume there. We're launching today a policies to grow credible transition bonds market. If I can have the slide up on the screen, please. We are absolutely excited by the GX plan. The fact that this is the Japanese government, with METI, who of course is famous in the 1960s for having driven the development of Japan with strong state action and direction, now doing it again on the shift to green transformation, but doing it in collaboration, in consultation, in a close working relationship with industry and finance. This is the model the world needs. There are things we have to do. We have to fix some planning bottlenecks. Our onshore wind has been too slow in Japan. We could easily fix that. It will require probably Parliament to act. We need to be tough on phase-outs, in line with the IEA trajectories. We need to promote global standards for industry to ensure low carbon. We need to promote transition plans everywhere. We only have 200 companies in Japan now. It should be every major company. And of course, we need to get this GX bond out, which we hope will be a demonstration for the whole market. There is much to be done, but there is much to celebrate in the change we've made so far. The supertanker of the Japanese economy, along with the supertanker of the global economy, is turning. And that is incredibly exciting. That will create opportunities. Just think of that figure I mentioned. 1,400 trillion yen per annum of capital to be invested in transition. That is Keynesian stimulus on steroids. That is economic boom for everyone.
Thank you, Sean. Always very energetic intervention. Thank you so much. And thank you for the book, the Japan book. We will look into it very carefully. And you talked about there's lots of capital. It's about how to redirect the capital. And I understand in EIB, Ms. Ayla, you are always managing how to direct these capital. May I ask your experience about the transition finance?
Okay, yes, thank you. So yes, I'm Ayla Krevi, I'm from EIB. I spent most of my working life at the Capital Markets Department of EIB. And now, since 18 months, I've been an advisor who is only focused on sustainable finance. Now, transition, I think somebody said to me a couple of years ago that when you talk about transition, you need to know where you are transitioning to and by when. So we are here talking about 2050 net zero transition. So let's put that first on the table. And we had some maybe 5-6 years ago, there was the first wave of excitement in the market about transition bonds and transition finance. And there were some transactions which were not so well done. They were mostly about, I don't know, oil companies who were cutting a little bit their scope 1 or scope 2 emissions, and this was regarded pretty much as greenwashing. And the whole term became a little bit tainted. Can I have the picture now, the graph here? So this is to me quite helpful when I think about transition finance and green finance and everything. So if we simplify things somewhat, we have 3 kinds of activities. We have the significantly harmful, which is coal, oil, etc., in this red part, and heavy emitting industries for the time being. Then we have at the other end the green, which we have been talking about now for years already. We pretty much know what that is. But as you said at the beginning, not everything can go green immediately. We need to do improvements which get you over the threshold that you are good enough, we can live with that. And this is this yellow intermediate space. And this is how we, for example, at EIB think about, we have said that we do half of our business nowadays in that green sector, and the other half needs to be at least in the yellow or the orange, so at least it doesn't slow down the transition to that net zero by 2050. So if you look at these small arrows there, in the red space there's a small red arrow. That is what I talked about, these fossil fuel industry improving a little bit their emissions. Could have been an oil company who says that they do oil drilling powered by solar panels. That's a small red arrow there. It's not green, it's not transition, it's just slightly better brown, that's all. And indeed, you have things which can improve all the way up to the green, but this yellow arrow here is what we are talking about today. You get out of the red zone and you get into the transition zone. So this is what we at EIB think of as transition. And I think some elements that have been missing in this market as well are now elements that we are seeing. You mentioned, for example, the METI, you have these industry pathways, which I think is excellent. It is certainly an element that has been missing. So for heavy emitting industries, having government setting up some sort of pathways, that's a very helpful part. And also, as Nicholas showed in his slide, I think it was the first box which said that you have a transition strategy. So it's not just about making a small red arrow there. It is really about what is your entity level overall transition strategy. This is not just about window dressing today. It is about the bigger picture. So I think now we start to have things falling into place that we can really talk about real transition finance. And I think it's from our side for EIB, we have not really flagged this enough. We have talked a lot and usually do about our green finance, but we are now focusing more on also this transition finance. It can be heavy emitting industries, but very often this is actually what Sean was saying, that you are retrofitting existing buildings, because we can't expect that we tear down all existing buildings and we build new net zero energy buildings instead. We have to take the existing stock and improve their energy efficiency. So this is something that we have done for years, for a lot. We haven't talked about it as transition finance, but that's what it is basically. And then indeed this heavy industry transition is something that we have heard about it a lot today. I think now we start to have really the building blocks on the table that we can start talking about this for real. So I'm also quite hopeful and optimistic about this happening. You can't be really not optimistic when you are sitting next to Sean Kidney, so it's somehow contagious. So that's my 2 cents on transition for starters.
Thank you, Ayla-san. It's very impressive that we think about EU, we always think about EU taxonomy, which sounds like a dichotomy, but now in real operation, you are capturing the transition in a more gradation kind of view. This is very interesting. Now I move on to IHI from the industry side. Kubota-san is a very experienced technology specialist. Can you tell us IHI's corporate strategy of technological development for transition to carbon neutrality and IHI's story about issuing transition bonds? Kubota-san, please.
Yes, Kihara-san. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to show our activity today. So my name is Nobuhiko Kubota, Managing Executive Officer and General Manager of Corporate R&D. So this year marks the 170th anniversary from our foundation, a little bit old company. And so our company, IHI, founded in shipbuilding, but recently moved to another business area, so mainly energy and environment, and social infrastructure, and industry machinery, and so aero engine and space. So right now we focused on the development to achieve the carbon neutrality. So especially we would like to create the ammonia value chain. So today, I will show you our activity regarding the ammonia value chain and the downstream side. Could you show a slide? Here is a figure of our ammonia utilization technologies. Sean-san pointed out, so we have to cover all the industry, not only the power sector. So right side and the up one is regarding the power sector. We are trying to fabricate, develop the boiler burner, and also the gas turbine heavy duty one with GE. This is the power sector. All the things described here is using the fuel ammonia. So middle size is for industry. Small gas turbine, 2 megawatt. This is useful for in-house power generator in works. So we succeeded to develop the 100% ammonia liquid type gas turbine last year. And next figure is the furnace. Right now, so we will apply to the fuel ammonia to some furnace, so every industry. The last figure of center is a package boiler, small one. So we will cover the small works also. And bottom one is applying for maritime and also storage. Storage is a mid-stream of the ammonia value chain. Applying to the vessel and also tugboat. So next year, around May, so we will start the demonstration with the tugboat as a fuel of ammonia. And the right side, bottom side, large-scale storage tank. So anyway, now so we IHI is focused on to develop the such as ammonia application right now. And so half of this activity is supported by Green Innovation Fund operated by NEDO. And also IHI have issued the transition bond, totally 20 billion yen last year. But Sean-san mentioned that this is a little bit small, but we have to think about that. Anyway, so we will also contribute to the challenge to reach, achieve the carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kumoto-san. So in the second round of the discussion, let's look into specific examples of transition and development of decarbonization technology, which are underway, often supported by public program. First, let me ask Kumoto-san of IHI the current status of developing ammonia-based thermal and gas-fired technology, and when the technology will be ready. And secondly, how IHI is involved in the related supply chain. And three, how you can address do no significant harm, DNSH, and carbon lock-in.
Thank you again. So could you show the slide? Okay. So I will show the two types of fuel ammonia usage in power sector. So upstream is regarding to the gas turbine. So as I mentioned, we succeeded to develop a 2 megawatt size of gas turbine or with 100% ammonia monocombustion. So we will commercialize this small gas turbine to 2027. And also, as I mentioned, now so we are discussing about development the large size heavy-duty gas turbine with GE. We have signed with GE in this January. So at such as the largest one is 2030, we will commercialize it. And bottom line is boiler. So next year, March of 2024, 20% of coal combustion with coal-firing boiler in Hekinan in Jerasan start to demonstrate operation. But you know the really big size of commercial size coal-firing boiler. And add to the percentage of ammonia and 2028. So we will reach the 50% half is for fuel ammonia, we will use it. And finally, anyway, so right side, our goal is, of course, zero carbon emission thermal power plant. This is the final goal. This is our roadmap using the fuel ammonia. And anyway, again, so I would like to say, so we would like to solve the several issues regarding the carbon neutral with some technology. And we have to accelerate this development for the world. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Kumoto-san. Actually, there's very new information here. When we talk about co-combustion, ammonia was always stored together with coal fire plant. However, Komodo-san just introduced the gas turbine, application of ammonia to gas turbine, which will be ready by 2030. This is a very new information. The technology is very fast. And I'd like to move on, I'd like to ask Eira-san again. Can you tell us generally how EU is trying to support technological development for transition or decarbonization, and the role of government support, and any issues on information disclosure in this respect?
Yes, that was that can be a long story, but I try to stick to the time frame. Yes, so the way we see it at EIB is that us as public sector money, we need to support the new slightly riskier technologies if needed, because, for example, private sector money may be a little bit shy to go into that, at least on its own. We did this 30 years ago with offshore wind when private funding did not want to do this on their own. Now it's pretty much plain vanilla business, and we have some new technologies which are developing, which we are happy to support. And we don't see it that we need to, as public sector actor, be picking the winners or losers. We just need to avoid the sure losers, and that's all we need to do. And as a good example of the new technologies, we have now been financing one. We are looking at a couple of other projects in floating wind. The first such wind farm was built in Portugal, I think 2 years ago. And we have a very nice video about that in our website, by the way, if you want to look at it. It's the advantages of this system is that they are built with the same technology as oil platforms, basically. And you can use them in any kind of coast, even if the coast is very steep, you can do this because it's only attached to the bottom with a cable. It's not built into the seabed. It's not yet commercially totally viable. It is quite expensive, but so was offshore wind 30 years ago as well. It could not have started without subsidies. But we believe that if this becomes commercially scalable, it can be a huge contribution to electricity generation globally. The advantages of this system is that, for example, when you take the wind turbines further out to the sea in floating format, you have a more stable wind, you have more wind, and the winds are less turbulent, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but that is the case. And that means that in the parts of the wind turbine, there's less fatigue, so there's less usage. You can have, for example, in the ones that are built now outside Portuguese coast, they can support waves up to 20 meters, wind more than 100 kilometers per hour, so they can support quite some stormy circumstances. What you need for them, however, is big port capacity to build them. You need very strong docks which can support the very high cranes that you need in order to assemble them. You need a big port basin and a steep one because you need to float them out on a day when the weather is very nice, because these things, when you put them up for the first time, they are like a fully loaded Boeing 747 put on its nose. So it's a bit of a challenge, but you can. And then you need storage capacity in the port for all these various parts, because these parts are huge. So it's not just technology for the wind turbines, it's also the capacity onshore where you assemble these things. But we think that this is very promising as technology, and indeed also putting it out further out to the sea, you don't get the problems of onshore wind or close onshore when people don't like how they look or they don't like the noise they create, whatever. So this is something that we are supporting quite strongly, among other things. This is not the only thing, obviously. And the public sector is, we do this sort of in blended finance terms with the European Commission, for example, there's a program which is called InvestEU. It's meant to mobilize almost 400 billion euros of financing over 5 or 6 years. It's not only about green transition, it's also about innovation, about digitalization. It was basically created as a program for the post-COVID recovery. The support for these investment programs comes also from the budget money of the European Union. So these are some examples of what we do, how we support, and how we continue to support.
Yes, thank you very much. So then I go to Sean-san and then Nicolas-san. Can you give us your comments on how you view the technological development and governmental support after listening to the comments by Japan, Europe? Also, please show us any area to advise on enhancing the information disclosure and public awareness. Sean-san, please.
Well, we clearly need to be sure that what we're doing is in the right direction. We need to link it to data, as we heard earlier on an earlier panel. We need to make sure there is annual reporting of what we do. We need the transparency that the ICMA principles have identified as critical going forward. All of these are just givens. However, above all, we need innovation in industrial processes. And, you know, when I started talking about ammonia, learning about ammonia, I should say, which was new territory for me when I started, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's the head of the International Fertilizer Association about the scale of fertilizer that we need to replace with green fertilizer, because it's currently produced largely from gas. And we have to stop that gas because now we know the methane leakage from supply of gas is so bad that we've been miscalculating our emissions for the last 30 years. In fact, emissions are likely to be much higher than we think now as we start realising just how much escapes fugitive emissions from the LNG supply chain, for example. So we need to replace fertiliser. That's vast. We need to replace so many things in industry. That is vast. In shipping. Last week, I met the CEO of Ocean Express in Singapore, which is the company formed of the 3 container lines in Japan. And they're experimenting right now with how to change all the turbines and ships to ammonia-based turbine. They see that as the most likely direction. This is a vast job that has to be done. And they're beginning to say, okay, we're going to do it if we assure the safety is there. And of course, when I learn about IHI's work, I'm thinking, this is fantastic. Because that's exactly what we need. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some things I'm dubious about. But you know what? Right now, we need to be researching every single possible avenue of change to make sure that we cover the territory, because there is so much to be done. We are talking about a wholesale renovation of our global economy. As I said before, there has never been an industrial transition at the scale that we're talking about. It's doable, it's possible. I can put you to a dozen studies, but it is not simple and it's not easy. I mean, there are other things I would argue about in the GX plan too. I'm dubious about perovskite solar, for example. But hey, what do I know? I'm not a solar expert. It looks like there are other pathways. Research and development, yes, please. Before we deploy, we ensure that we have minimum thresholds, proper guidance in line with METI's commitment to 1.5 degrees to determine what are the right things to do and not do. That's where we are now. Look, a revolution is starting here. The revolution, you've seen it in InvestEU, in the IRA in the US, and the GX plan, is simple. These are symptoms of the tsunami of change that's coming through. It will lead to a long boom. We will see energy prices in 2040 lower than they have been in history, thanks to the renewable energy revolution that's happening. I'm going to take a bet, I'll bet anyone in the room that's going to happen. But we have to deal with some problems in the meantime. How do we make sure our economies start changing quickly enough to avoid the catastrophe that awaits us if we don't get emissions down as fast as we need to get? We need roadmaps. We need incentives. Thank you, GX plan. We need regulatory supports in every sector. Although one thing that we need to push in the GX plan is energy efficiency measures in households in Japan. not enough in that area. Please, Shinichi, we'll talk about that afterwards. But of course, when you try to renovate a whole economy, there is a hell of a lot to it. The exciting thing about what's happening here is the closeness of the collaboration between finance, industry, and government. It is impossible to shift the planet without that close collaboration. Every country needs to do the same. I'm hoping that Japan can lead the way, can show the world about how to do this. That also fills me with hope that we have a chance.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, we'll talk about the household energy efficiency later. Nicolas, can you intervene on your say about the technology development?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm always wary of commenting on technology as someone who is neither a scientist nor an engineer. And one of the lines that we've tried to draw at the level of the executive committee, the principles, where we have many representatives of the financial industry, whether they're issuers, intermediaries, or investors, is to be very clear that we are financial and capital market specialists. We're not trying to substitute for academics, scientists, and engineers. Now, at a high level, however, what you can say is that the role of innovation, I think, has been consistently underestimated in the debate around transition. One thing I like to use as a parallel is the experience we had during the pandemic, where we achieved in an extraordinarily short time collectively a path to multiple vaccines. And when you go back to what was said at the beginning of the pandemic and when we actually landed, there's a complete disconnect between the expected timelines and the reality that again we managed to get to through an extraordinary international effort. And I think that is a useful lesson when we look at transition. And to the point that Sean is making, absolutely, we need to ensure that money and financing is going towards the transition. We need to bet on innovation. We need to be open-minded about these things. And we need to recognize that some work that we have been doing, such as taxonomies, are actually very bad at integrating innovation and the speed at which things can dramatically change. And again, the example of the cost of energy produced by renewables is another extraordinary example of how every single target and expectation has been surpassed over time. Now, the other thing I'd like to say is investors, asset managers are inherently conservative. Not all of them, but a great majority of them. So when you start talking about new technologies, for example, ammonia, you immediately have to deal with this conservative reflex. And this is where communication campaigns, transparency are extremely important, but also government support and subsidies, because there will be times where simply the private sector and the markets won't be ready to make these bets. It depends which market we're talking about. It depends to some extent which jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions are much more favorable to innovation than others. But I say generally, as a rule, government has an important role, particularly when governments have had an experience of doing these things. And again, all jurisdictions are not the same. Some governments are, know how to do this, and others, do not have that background. To finish this up, I would say that the work that the Japanese government is doing on industry remote roadmaps is highly commendable. This is something which really does need to be done to clarify how industries can transition. And then finally, again, the support for disclosures and transparency as embodied by our handbook, that endorsement from the Japanese government and their clarity around these things is very, very helpful.
Yes, thank you, Nicolas-san. we went through the 2 rounds, and unfortunately, it's time to wrap up. So let me try to summarize the discussion in this final session. So yes, there was a comment from Sean that research every avenue of change is very important. So the speeding up the transition and just trying all possible potential is very important. And also, you mentioned that close collaboration between industry, finance, and public sector is very important. And that's exactly what we are doing right now. And then, Nicola-san, thank you for introducing your revised Climate Transition Finance Handbook. This will be even more important guide for credible transition. And more issue of transition loans will come in the future. And Eira-san, thank you for providing all your experience and your view on the transition finance from the everyday operation. And we find interesting that you're going beyond the dichotomy. You're moving into your view, the red, green, amber, that gradation system is very, very interesting. I think that matches what we are trying to capture as a transition. And actually, right now, and some people talked about Japan's roadmap, which we identify all the necessary technology and when it's going to come by based on the best available science. But what we are doing right now is even update our roadmap and make the roadmap more quantifiable. So we will, today the target is, the date is there, but we don't specify the emission reduction numbers, but we are running the model to fit actual numbers. The roadmap will reach what emission reduction is going to reach. So we will have more sophisticated roadmap coming up soon. And also, Eira-san talked about your experience about financing, installing new technology, your experience on offshore wind. This is very, very interesting to us. Japan is also trying to set up the new GX promotion organization, and we are trying to find a good way to establish a blended finance effectively. There's a death valley between the demonstration stage and on the scale-up stage, and we want to learn from all the experience from outside. And Kumoto-san, thank you very much for your introduction about all the technologies, the ammonia technology. It does not apply only on power, but on industry and other application. And we are very encouraged that your technology is much faster than we thought. You said it's going to be commercially available before 2030. And so the science will choose the technology, not ideology, that we think. And we think our Japan's approach is technology neutral on the transition path. But the technology is fast, but we need to do more than technology at this moment. We have to build more good supply chain. We have to think about how to meet the cost gap that exists there. So in Japan, we are trying to introduce the contract for different type scheme for hydrogen or ammonia fuel. So in summary, it is difficult for all the industries and countries to just switch off to become zero emission. In this session, we share the importance of achieving whole of economy carbon neutrality by promoting credible transition by all countries and all industries. The key concept of transition is becoming more important and widely recognized. Challenge still remains and widely recognized, but we can overcome and speed up transition by close collaboration between industry, finance, and public sectors. And we are very optimistic. We find more opportunity than challenge ahead of us. So this is a very quick wrap up of this session 4. And please allow me to wrap up the whole day, session 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what I was asked by the Secretariat. So throughout the whole day session on GGX TCFD Summit, overall, reflecting on the discussion from this morning, we were able to discuss the importance of decarbonizing the industrial sector and how finance, supported by robust disclosures of risks and opportunities, plays a crucial role in its realization. And achieving carbon neutrality is an all-hands-on-deck issue. 全員集合です. Everybody on the deck. All actors from business, finance, and policymakers must come together to realize an economy that achieves both economic growth and decarbonization. That is why this summit is so crucial. It provides an opportunity where actors from all sectors can convene and exchange views on what is needed to design the future. And as discussed in this panel, transition finance enables hard-to-abate sectors to make necessary investment. These efforts can only be supported through engagement between industries and financial institutions on the basis of robust and credible transition plan disclosures, as discussed in the discussion 3. It is also important to incentivize business to make efforts through the demand side, for example, by creating green markets, as discussed in the discussion 1. Also, the role of business as solution provider, as noted in the discussion 2, is also an important driver for green transformation. Corporates making such contributions should be properly accelerated through their disclosures, as we discussed on the avoided emission in the second panel. And also we discussed about the financed emission as one of the challenge on the transition finance. So as you recognize, all these points we discussed today throughout the 4 sessions are all intertwined. So you can understand why all sectors from business, finance, policymakers must be involved to overcome the challenges. I believe the discussion today have brought us one step, maybe even more steps closer to the goal, as this summit has been doing for the past 4 years. The importance of disclosures in finance in decarbonizing the whole of the economy will not change. We hope to see you again next year to further develop these discussions together. Once again, I would like to thank all the speakers, panelists, and all the participants who contributed to this intensive discussion towards the realization of a global green transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kihara and the panelists for sharing your valuable insights. Lastly, I'd like to invite to the podium Mr. Peter Backer, President and CEO, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to give the closing remark.
Well, thank you so much, and good evening, good afternoon. At the end of this rich day, I mean, I've been asked to make the closing remarks, but Kihara-san did such a good job that I'm not going to summarize the day again. I flew in this morning from Europe, and in the last hour of the flight, I dug out the 2019 closing speech I made in the TCFD Summit then. There's a couple of interesting notions that I picked up there. The conversations at that point were rather conceptual. TCFD was out, but we didn't quite know what it was going to be. In none of my closing words at that year did I mention the word climate change. Net zero, I think, wasn't even invented in our speak in those days. We were actually talking about the virtuous cycle of growth and environment. Well, how different was today's conversation? Every conversation, all 4 panels, all the high-level speakers were talking about the need to decarbonize at pace, reducing emissions by up to 50% in 2030, get to net zero by no later than 2050. We're talking about decarbonizing industry, promoting innovation through avoided emissions, providing investors with decision-useful information through standardized disclosures, obviously the ISSB. And then in the last session, the integration of all these transitions in bonds, as well as a look through some of the promising technologies. Climate transition is no longer a concept that it was in 2019. It is now the driving force. It is a call to action. And capital, as Sean said so eloquently, is available. We just need to put it to work. So one of the things that I expect at COP28 to be one of the biggest conversations is the emergence of what is called the Corporate Performance and Accountability System. Yes, we need to decarbonize, find new solutions, but we need to put this in transition plans. We need to measure ourselves whether we're making progress towards those plans and science-based targets. We need to account for the emissions, greenhouse gas protocol, scope 3 accounting, and avoided emissions accounting are now becoming the norm. And last but not least, we need to disclose that progress to the capital markets, the financiers, and obviously the other stakeholders. So by companies making better decisions, we can get to a point that the financial markets will integrate that carbon performance into their valuations, will then be able to direct more capital to where the solutions are most promising, so that the companies who have those solutions get rewarded for the efforts and can scale them up more. As was said, the TCFD has loaded many of its concepts into ISSB and other now well-recognized platforms. Whether or not that means that the TCFD Summit will disappear is up to Matti, I would assume. But I would argue, don't throw it away too early. Because TCFD may have delivered a lot of its goods, but TNFD has just been launched 2 weeks ago in New York, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And I can tell you, because my organization is involved in the setting up of the TISFD, the Task Force for Inequality and Social Financial Disclosures, will be launched in the coming month. So that is copy-paste of what TCFD has done to other key sustainability and sustainable development areas that is to come. And I know, if I'm well informed, that in Japan already the TNFD consortium is being formed. And this week during the PRI sessions, the heads, the CEO and the chair of TNFD will be in Tokyo presenting what TNFD is all about. So we have 7 years to reduce emissions by 45%. A whole economy transition is needed of a size, a scale that has never been done before, as panel 4 so eloquently said. We need to completely innovate the technologies we use. We need to hold ourselves accountable and provide economic incentives that will scale up these transitions, and we need to work together. And that's one of the big values of conferences like this, where financial players, corporate players, government players, science comes together to say, how will we get this done? So let me say a big compliment to Japan. As Ito-san, you said, almost 1,500 out of 4,700 companies are on TCFD in Japan, and I'm sure TNFD will go down a similar path. The integration of GGX and TCFD Summit, bringing the transition together with the disclosure and the accountability side, is really a promising step going forward. And last but not least, let me thank Matti for its leadership and the TCFD consortium. Let me thank all of you here in the room and anyone online for being with us this year. And I'm not sure under what title, but I am sure we'll meet again next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bakker. That concludes the GGX TCFD Summit. Thank you for joining us today.